I've never watched the Magic Sandwich show before, but I saw on a Thunderfoot vid that he was going to discuss what happens if you put your hand in front of this machine that physicists have built that can accelerate tennis balls to up to 150 miles per hour, which is near the speed of light. And the answer, or what I thought would be the answer, would be on the Magic Sandwich show, so I decided, okay, I will check it out. And Thunderfoot talked about this in some detail. Answer is nobody really knows. It was speculation, but I thought, okay, that's pretty good. Then toward the end, they said, up next, Inmendham. And I thought, okay, I might check that out and see what's going on. Now, Thunderfoot dealt with this topic very scientifically, and it was a serious discussion. But when Inmendham came on, there was a total change in attitude. And this was largely by Thunderfoot, but not exclusively, because along with Thunderfoot was DPR Jones, who maintained a sense of fairness, although it may not have been totally fair. And of course there was Aaron Raw and Concordance dressed in a mask of Bill Tilden, an ancient tennis player, and I don't know why that was the case. But anyhow, if you looked at the part before, that was part, I think, 2 or 1, part 1, and then you looked at part 2, they were talking about a topic which I haven't really been following that much, called anti-natalism, okay? And what Gary was basically saying is that we should seriously question whether people should play tennis. And instead of exploring this issue in a serious way, as Thunderfoot had done previously about sticking your hand in front of this 150-mile-an-hour tennis ball machine, he basically just blew Gary off. I mean, what he did was he basically said that, well, they won't, I mean, this is what he would have said. This is what he would have said about the tennis balls. He would have said, if Gary was there asking the question, Thunderfoot would have said, well, it's moot, it doesn't matter. They won't let you stick your hand in front of the tennis ball, so we shouldn't even talk about it. And that's what happened with anti-natalism, okay? What happened is that Gary was trying to talk about it philosophically, and what Thunderfoot was doing is, don't you understand the parameter space, the thermodynamics of the parameter space between a singles court and a doubles court, and the odds of the ball going there, and the thermodynamics and the entropy of all that? And Gary was basically saying, but we should talk about it. And Thunderfoot says, well, yeah, but look, if you don't let your kids play tennis, then the parents that let their kids play tennis will play tennis, and they'll have more kids, and soon everyone will play tennis. And so, you know, we shouldn't even talk about it. Yeah, that's blowing him off, because, okay, Gary is kind of like an asshole. He's got personality problems and, you know, all that kind of stuff, and he whines and he complains and he says people interrupt him all the time and he interrupts other people, but whatever. I mean, the question is philosophical. It doesn't have to do with, you know, whether it can or can't be possible, because in philosophy, whether you agree with a point or not, you can basically talk about both sides, and whether it's possible or not is irrelevant. It's just a question of, is this a good idea or not? The practicalities are not part of that. And nobody seemed to get that, because they're all just blowing Gary off. And, you know, now DPR, okay, was trying to be fair in that at all. And what happened is Thunderfoot like asked this question. He said, Gary, what would you do if your balls itch? You know? And then Gary said, what would you do if your balls what? What? I can't hear you. I'm sorry, I can't hear you. And Thunderfoot said, what would you do if your balls itch? And Gary said, what? What? I can't hear you. Now the correct answer should have been, scratch them. But Gary didn't get to do that. And then DPR Jones says, okay, well, we're going to get back to that point with Thunderfoot. But he never fucking did. And he kept saying that. We'll get back to that point. But he never did, okay? And then he tried to clarify. He said, so Gary, are you saying that nobody should play tennis? Okay, nobody should play tennis? And Gary says, well, I think we should talk about it, you know? And so basically he says, well, at the very least, people should consider whether they should let their children play tennis, and we should, you know, have that discussion. And DPR said, well, you know, if you had kids, would you let them play tennis? He said, no, you know, I wouldn't do that.
And what happened was Gary was basically saying that when you play tennis, it's dog eat dog. When you have a tournament, what happens is only one person wins, and they have to claw and fight and defeat people to get there, and they suffer through it, and then they win the tournament, but everybody else loses, and the whole process repeats again. You know, it's dog eat dog, get the ball, follow the ball, and then Concordance comes in there with a Bill Tilden mask, and he says, well, if you play tennis on your own at a wall, your balls go back and forth, and that's it, okay? It's just, that's all there is to it. That's a reductionist thing. But then, if you play with someone else in a big tournament with lots of people around there, and it's broadcast worldwide, then that's like an emergent phenomena. And you know, when I have this experience, even though I can't win the tournament, I can vicariously experience the struggle and the pain and the suffering that they go through, and they can rise above it, and that's what makes life such a great thing. And that's why we should play tennis, don't you see? And then Aaron Raw, who had been pretty quiet all the time, said that he doesn't know if he has great genes or not, or great environment, but he loves to play tennis. None of which was the fucking point. The point is that the overall suffering of all the people playing tennis, all the muscle sprains and all the busted knees and elbows, is it worth it? Nobody addresses these points. Okay, so finally what happens is there's one more question with Thunderfoot, you know, and he's basically totally annoyed. He's got this attitude like, fuck you, Gary. I mean, you could just see it. You know, he even left during the conversation, came back, made the lens fuzzy, came back and went, ugh. I admit it. Gary is a pain. He's kind of an asshole and all, but he's a really bright guy. And he really deserved a little bit more than this. Now, I don't really watch him, so I don't know if you get so fucking sick of him that you treat him like shit. But these people were treating him like shit. And so finally what happens is Thunderfoot, you know, after Gary's raising a point, says, well, it's all facile, you know, it's all facile, and we can't even agree, and says we're not even going to talk about it because it's just ridiculous. And you know, what happens is Gary kind of raised the point, you know, you're treating me badly. You wouldn't treat William Lane Craig, you know, who's a great tennis player like this, just because I don't like tennis. Why are you doing this to me? And so they say, okay, Gary, bye, you know, and then the next episode, Zomgits, you know, Chris comes on. And so she's explaining, you know, Gary's philosophy. And she's doing a good job at the start, you know. And we're talking about Buddhism and all, and how they recognize that life is suffering, and this whole thing. And then what she does is she says, you know, is that I would be an anti-natalist if, you know, I just didn't think that, I don't think it's possible. I don't think it's possible to get everybody not to play tennis. That's not the point. The point is to have a conversation whether or not it makes sense to have people play tennis, not whether it's possible. It's a separate issue, and nobody talks about that. They're all avoiding the issue. In fact, there was no really serious discussion. I think Zomgits did the best job, and then she says that, and that's crap again, okay? Because you can have a conversation of things that are not practical and not even possible, but they might be desirable. You can talk about that. And of course, if you're very, very into what's practical, then you're just gonna, and you think Gary's an asshole, then you can blow him off. But then Zomgits says, Chris says, that, you know, there's terrible pain when you're playing tennis. For instance, you could break a nail. That's like the worst thing that could happen. And of course, people pick up on that and all. And then it's clear that she has no idea about tennis. I mean, none of the women players, and none of the men players, I doubt, maybe one, have long nails. I mean, Maria Sharapova doesn't. Nobody. Breaking a nail. I mean, you can bust a tendon, Achilles heel. You can have bad knees, the meniscus in your knees, and all that. And then the worst example of suffering was breaking a nail, and that just like did it for me. Anyway, the last two tournaments on clay just recently, Nadal beat Djokovic, and I think he's going to win the French Open. So I am not an anti-Nadalist.